Plus when
Are you
we're
guys
live.
ready? Okay.
Yeah.
I'd like to call this meeting to order. And
Wait till he says you're live. You're muted, Eric.
All right. Thank you. Welcome, everyone. I'd like to welcome everyone to our meeting today. I would like to remind you that at 2:33 today, the United States is going to launch a rocket to the International Space Station, the first one since 2011. So I would love to be done by 2:15 if we could. So be motivated if possible so we can watch the Falcon 9 fly. I have my NASA shirt on in honor. Anyway, thank you. This is a live stream. I want to just go over the kind of the rules for the public and for the record. This is an all remote electronic meeting with no other location, no anchor location. So we're all online. Public comments are invited via email or phone. We received one written public comment, which everybody has received. We're not taking public comment during the meeting. So all the public comment that we're using for this meeting, we received prior to the meeting. And we'll amend and we'll append the public comment to the meeting minutes. This meeting is available live viewing for public through the UTA YouTube channel. So if you're out there and you would like to watch this on YouTube, the UTA YouTube channel would be the place to do it. I will note that Mayor Erin Mendenhall won't be able to stay with us for the whole meeting, but she's here now and will have to leave about 1:15. So we appreciate her attendance. Is everybody able to hear me okay? If you can, raise your hands up and wave, that'd be great. And if you have a question or want to speak as well, how about just raising your hand? It'll take you back to Welcome Back Cotter or Sheck, but just raise your hand and we'll call on you when you want to speak. So moving forward, item number
Chair?
2.
Mr.
Yes.
Chair, sorry, I'm raising my hand.
Go ahead.
I'm going to jump off at 1:15, but I'll be right back. I just have a weekly radio spot, and I'll come right back after.
Awesome. Thank you.
Thanks.
Okay. Item number 2 is next, and it's our Safety First Minute. Sheldon Shaw is going to present that. Go ahead, Sheldon.
Good morning, Chair. Council members, I appreciate the opportunity. I want to highlight a statewide initiative, which is Utah's 100 Deadliest Days. And unfortunately, it's not going great so far in the state. Given that traffic is down around 60% around the state and accidents are down 50%, unfortunately, our fatalities are up this year compared to the last 2 years. And so the accidents we are having are severe ones on our highways and our streets. And so just a reminder to everyone that we need to obey the speed limits. We need to make sure we have our seatbelts on. Don't be distracted with your cell phone or other things. And of course, drive sober. Appreciate the opportunity, Chair.
Thank you. Item number 3 is next, and that is our consent items. And so the items that are on the calendar for consent vote are item A is approval of the February 19th, 2020 Advisory Council meeting minutes. And item B is approval of agency bylaw and board policy revisions. Do any of you have any, either one or both of those items? Would anyone like to discuss those items?
Mr. Chair.
Go ahead.
Clint Smith. I'd like to make a motion to approve our consent items A.
This is Karen. I'll second it.
All right, we have a motion by Mr. Smith to approve and a second by Karen to approve the consent items A and B. Is there any further discussion? All right, seeing none or hearing none. All in favor of approving the consent items A and B, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Aye, and I'll buy that. Are there any opposed? All right, seeing no opposed, the motion carries unanimously.
Can we go back to February 19th as our health now go? I'll take 19th any day now.
I like that. We wish we could. So, okay, item number 4 is next. That's the Board of Trustees report. We'll have some information and discussion. Hopefully, Carlton Christensen's going to make that presentation. The items are strategic development of future transit opportunities and onboard and benchmark surveys, as well as updates to the state and local officials. Carlton, go ahead, sir.
Good afternoon, Mr. Chair. I just would note that my two colleagues, Beth Holbrook and Kent Millington, are also online with us, and certainly any of us are available if there are questions as we go through them. If I could have the next slide, please. We have recognized, I think as many of you have, for many years, UTA has been limited in being able to advance large capital projects, and there's a number of reasons that flow into that. And while we don't have an abundance of new capital dollars, we also recognize as opportunities present themselves, whether it might be down the road in some kind of future federal stimulus type of infrastructure package, or even a large state bonding package, that we have a number of projects that frankly are not shovel ready. We know that we need to do some preliminary work on that, which includes environmental work as well as some early engineering, just to have projects that could be evaluated and move forward should opportunities present themselves. We're not suggesting that they be in lieu of service commitments that have been made, but it behooves us to be ready should an opportunity present itself. So one of the items that you'll see in the capital fund is what the board is supportive of, is to try to advance some of this environmental work and this preliminary works on a number of projects, so that we're just frankly in a better position. These are all projects that are in line with the regional transportation plan, so they're not necessarily new projects, but they're moving those projects forward. Next slide, please. Annually, we conduct a benchmark survey through our marketing communications folks, and that survey's been a great barometer over the years and letting us know where we are as an agency, where our challenges may present themselves, and where opportunities might be as well. We recently had a survey that was actually done and completed before the COVID-19 challenges have come to us. So these this assessment really is prior to that, but it nevertheless provides us a good overview. Just a couple things that I would point out: that about 2/3 of the respondents have reported a favorable opinion of the agency, and public perception of our bus service is actually at the highest level that it has been in the past 4 years, and we're grateful for that. I think there's a number of things that flow into that, including recent efforts by Salt Lake City and others with more frequent service. But overall, bus perception of bus ridership has improved. Also, only 4% reported a less favorable opinion of UTA than in years past, and we believe the overall perception of the agency is improving. If I could have the next slide, please. Additionally, about every 5 years, an onboard survey is done of the actual riders, and they go through a number of intensive questions that give us a lot of guidance and insight to who's riding our system, why they're riding the system, what are some trends that we may want to look at. Not only have we done this onboard survey that was actually done before this period of time, but we're currently out doing a small survey as well to kind of guide us in where ridership and needs are going forward, and what would be needed in order to get people back on the system. But in the more recent survey, one of the things that we have kind of has hit home to us, which we think is a great thing, about half of our riders earn less than $40,000 dollars per year, and riders earning less than 10,000 grew by 7% since 2015. I think some of those numbers probably are student-born riders that historically don't have high salaries, but that overall ridership and the need of the service is apparent there. As we look at our current ridership and buses doing better than our other modes, there very much is a hard working part of our population that is dependent on our service. And in fact, more than half of UTA riders have no other option for transportation. And 3/4 of the UTA riders actually walk to the system, which also speaks to the fact that in addition to park and ride lots, that last mile barriers with sidewalks and other things that we're working on, and the recent Tiger grant and other efforts as we work with local governments is important in connecting our riders to our service. Next slide, please. As we come out of this experience, and I shouldn't say coming out because it's still very much with us, we begin to present the recovery plans to our local council of governments, and we'll continue to do so over the next month, and helping local officials understand how we're going to look at the situation, how we evaluate, and how what standards we'll use in bringing back the system online. We have an annual opportunity and obligation to present to the Transportation Commission, and we'll be doing that in June, giving an annual update on the agency and how it's doing, and are those partnerships that we do with UTA and others in moving things forward. And then we also are presenting to the Legislative Interim Committee in a couple of weeks on the safety protocols that have been put in place and that we are putting in place to allow the system to safely be operated as we go forward under the new challenges that face us. Next slide. I think that may be it, but is it? Yeah. That concludes our Board of Trustees reports. I don't know if Beth or Kent have anything to add to that, but we certainly are open to questions, Mr. Chair.
I think that economic data is very interesting. I've never seen that before. Is that the first time we've ever compiled something like that, economic demographics, or is that kind of always been ongoing?
I'll have to double check that one. I'm not sure. I
can answer that. This is Caroline.
Yeah, please, Carolyn.
So typically most onboard surveys, and I know UTA's had them before, does ask about demographics of our riders so that we have a sense of who's, as they sometimes call it, transit dependent, or those who this is their only option. How many vehicles are, that's asked in the survey, how many vehicles are owned in their household. So there's additional graphics. It's a pretty extensive report that we could send out to the committee that gives information real specific about our ridership, not down to the person, but down to sort of, the particularly who the riders are. And it also allows us to know who are riders who choose to use VTA and their demographics and what kind of modes they're using as well. So we could provide that information to the committee.
Well, that's the number of people that are walking their sole use of UTA. That's interesting. Does anyone else have any comments about that or any other portion of Carlton's report?
I do.
Mayor Mendenhall did.
Thanks, Carlton. Thanks, Mayor Walker. In the Utah Leads Together 3.0 plan, where they talk about the potential for the state to bond for shovel-ready transportation projects, probably a lot of our ears pricked up at that. Of course, looking at the revenue to pay back the bond is another conversation. But as an agency, are you looking at what some of those projects and partnerships might be? And do you plan to reach out to municipalities or counties on your own, or is that something that cities and counties should be coming to UTA with?
Well, So that there are about, I want to say 4 or 5 projects that we have identified that we feel like could be under construction in a year, with some requiring some environmental work, but some preliminary work has been done or is in the process of being done, and those projects could be ready. We certainly welcome suggestions from communities. We haven't done a massive outreach because we follow the regional transportation plan, and so as long as those projects are in the plan and those communities are ready on their portion of it, or maybe able to advance their work or their piece of it, we certainly would have those conversations. I know, for example, we've had the discussion with Salt Lake City, for example, and looking at light rail through part of the Granary district and coming around through the west side of downtown, and that looks very encouraging. And again, it's one of those places, if with a little bit of work, might be more ready to go than maybe some others that aren't that far along.
Can I just record you saying that again, Carlton?
Well, you have to understand that I've been breathing that project since 1999, so I'm actually
never
excited.
had the potential, so it is exciting.
Yeah.
Well, happy to meet on behalf of the city. We'd love to have that conversation some more.
Sure. I'm not sure, Mr. Chair. I didn't know if there was other questions.
Anyone else have any questions or comments on this part, on this item?
Mr. Chair, Clint Smith here. Just a question, again, some interesting statistics really on the demographics back that Carlton showed us. My question really is obviously we've had to make some service modifications through the pandemic, and we've seen our ridership fall. I guess my question is seeing some of those demographics, do we know how much, I guess, of an impact we've made to some of those individuals who rely on, public transit as their sole means of transportation? Obviously, jobs and things have all been in flux at that time, but I guess, how are we monitoring that to make sure that we're making, and Carolyn might be covering this in her report, but how are we monitoring to make sure that we're providing, or at least have those transportation options in place for the demographics that rely on them the most?
Yeah, I think Carolyn will speak to some of this as she talks about that, but on a general sense, Councilmember Smith, I would just say one of the reasons we're back out doing a survey is to help inform us of what needs exist. We're certainly working with local communities and employers in particular as they bring employment back online, making sure, and then we're monitoring ridership levels on all modes on a daily basis and adjusting those based on our plan to bring service back in where the demand is warranting it. And those levels or those criteria to go to the next level of service bringing on are much lower than they historically would be. Historically in transit, we try to get everybody we can in the one vehicle, and proximity to one another was never an issue. But with the new public health challenges, we are bringing that service on at a much easier or quicker pace, in the sense that we want to be able to provide safe and reliable space on board all of our vehicles for anybody who's using them, and that they're comfortable in doing that. And so but this is, for a large part, this is uncharted territory for us, and so that our usual models don't quite follow, but we're learning a lot, and we're trying to respond as quickly as we can.
Okay, thank you.
Mr. Chair, I have a question. This is Karen. The information, is it broken out by location, so we can see the different demographics per area? For example, up in Box Elder County or out in Tooele County?
Sure. I think there is some breakdown, by area, but let us do some checking. The actual study is a much more detailed study, and we can certainly get you some copies of that and circulate that. But let me find out if we've got it broken down on a smaller scale for you. I know that would be helpful.
Does anybody else have anything they want to add or any questions? Thank you. That was definitely interesting information.
Yeah, thank you.
Sure.
Thank you. We sure appreciate it.
I think as we go forward, we can start to target maybe our service a little better to, better serve people and be more efficient. That'll be good information. Item number 5 is next, and this is an agency report and service update. And Carolyn is going to present this. Go ahead, Carolyn.
Thank you. Good afternoon. Just want to give a little bit of presentation about what has been going on since the pandemic, since we actually last met on February 19th, and how things have changed a little bit in terms of our service and what we're seeing on our ridership. I apologize for some of you who might have seen this at the Salt Lake COG or other COGs you might have been at, or the JPAC meeting. It's not the same. We do have some other information on the presentation as well, but it will be somewhat similar. So I guess we could go. I'm going to introduce Eddie Cummins, our Chief Operating Officer. He'll give some of the information on the ridership, as well as Lawrence Simpson, who is heading up a recovery task force that we have. So we move to the next slide. Okay, so I guess the following slide. Just to let you know, I'm going to go through this real quickly, and Eddie will talk a little bit about this as well, but we did have some service modifications that happened on April 5th. And we saw a huge decrease right around March 11th, primarily when Rudy Gobert, they announced that he had it, as well as Tom Hanks and his wife, and the World Health Organization announced that this is considered a pandemic, a worldwide pandemic. At that point, we did see a huge decrease in ridership. So we did make service modifications on April 5th, and what we wanted to talk about was sort of the impacts on the ridership as well. But for the most part, we decreased the frequencies on most routes, tried to maintain the span of service to serve those essential trips, and did suspend some of the commuter bus routes. So I'm going to turn this over to Eddie to go through some of this presentation as well.
Thank you, Carolyn. So as Carolyn was saying, we made several adjustments to the bus. Also on light rail, we adjusted frequency from 15 to 30 minutes. And on commuter rail, we adjusted frequency from 30 to 60 minutes, Monday through Saturday. Next slide, please. So due to the COVID-19, oh, very good, thank you. Due to the COVID-19 pandemic, you can see that we significantly declined, as Carolyn said, starting on March 11th. You can see where it really drops. There's 5 points in time shown on this graph. You have March 11th, which was kind of our call to action. On March 18th was the day we experienced the earthquake. April 6th was change day when we implemented the changes from the previous slide. May 1st, we went to risk level orange. And on May 18th, we went to risk level yellow. So as you can see, recently we've started to see a slight uptick in ridership. And our most recent, I believe this is to May 19th, weekday ridership was 46,291. As you can see from the graph, our fixed route bus ridership, when we compare it to pre-COVID-19 ridership, was down 66%. Light rail was down 72%. Commuter rail, front runner, is down 83%, and paratransit is down 81%. Next slide, please. On Saturday ridership, a similar trend. You can see that on Saturdays, fixed route bus is down 47%, light rail is down 68%, front runner is down 66%, and paratransit ridership is currently down 73% on Saturdays. Next slide, please. We didn't see quite as significant decline on Sunday, but still a significant loss. Fixed route bus ridership is down 52%. Light rail is down 53%. We obviously don't run front runner service on Sundays, and paratransit ridership is down 65%. Next slide, please. So now kind of changing our attention to look at safety measures. Throughout this pandemic, we've implemented numerous safety measures over the past month and a half or so. One of the first things we did was establish a COVID-19 work group. This is a group of people that has representation from all chief offices. We were meeting every morning. We recently changed that to Monday, Wednesday, and Friday. But during that meeting, we monitor federal, state, local guidance, review best practices, share information, and ultimately make decisions on things that need to be changed. We provided PPE to our frontline employees, operators and mechanics, and then issued masks, gloves, and sanitizers and wipes. Next slide, please. Additional measures include enhanced vehicle and station and facility cleaning. We're using EPA-approved disinfectants, making sure that we are cleaning all the frequent touch points and making sure that we're doing daily disinfecting of all vehicle floors. We have discontinued handling of fare immediate passes, bike cards, things of that nature. Fare inspection is currently being conducted visually. We also installed a yellow line on buses 6 feet from operators to help with social distancing. Next slide, please. Likewise, on tracks and front runner, we roped off an area 6 feet from operators, again, to increase social distancing. We implemented rear door boarding on bus. Obviously, those who are requiring the wheelchair ramp can still enter through the front door, but everybody else is entering through the rear door. Also with that, we replaced the MCI buses with our regular buses on the Salt Lake City Park City Connect service so that we could have passengers boarding through the rear door. We implemented automatic opening of tracks doors at stations to keep people from having to push the buttons. And we installed temporary sneeze shields on high ridership bus routes. I believe we have a picture of those shields on the next slide. You can see these temporary shields. These are just inside the front door. You can see it closes off kind of the operator compartment to the rear of the bus. Also on the picture on the right, you can see that the door can be open, plexiglass door can be open so that people can still enter and exit through the front door. Next slide, please. This is a more, back one slide. This is a more permanent solution that we're looking at. You'll see this in the budget amendment today. This is a product that Gillig is making. A large portion of our fleet are Gillig buses. You can see that this provides protection for the operators. Also has a stanchion bar that goes around the fare box. And so we think this is going to be a good solution. Like I said, you'll see more about this today in the budget amendment. And with that, I will turn it over to Lauren Simpson to talk about our recovery plan.
Well, I'm gonna say, this is Carolyn, I'm gonna say a few words just real quick before going. We could go to the next slide. Lauren will cover that, but just want to let you know that when we were going through this time, things were changing daily, and it was useful to have this group of people meeting. We were constantly attending various listening sessions and sharing ideas with other transit agencies throughout the industry. We actually were very lucky. Our workforce showed up. They continued to be there. They have been really great during this time frame. We have not had issues with absenteeism. They've showed up. We've also, luckily, fortunately, have not had a lot of incidences of COVID-19 with our workforce. So we're been very happy about that. Even with the reduction in the service, the maintainers are actually moving forward on some projects that they had to catch up on, other things that are going on in terms of the various facilities. Eddie and I went out and visited all the shifts and all the units over the last, 2 weeks ago. Within a week, we covered them all. So it was really good to see the workforce. Their spirits are up, even though they're taking care of their families, and there's a little fear at times. Our operators have been great being out there on the front lines as well, and we really do appreciate all their activities. When we look at moving forward, just to let you know, I did talk a little bit about service choices today, but service choices was an effort, and we brought it to the advisory council a couple times about what we were doing. with this pandemic, we really are looking back at pulling back, and we're doing some surveys, which we'll talk about, to get data, but we're really trying to figure out the way we reduce the service will not be the way we bring it all back on again. And we're actually looking at how do we take a very measured approach within the fiscal financial constraints that we'll have, as well as where is the ridership coming from, and taking in all those considerations about who is using it. The one thing that our planning team can say is we're seeing some of these bus routes as really the workhorses of our system in terms of them serving these essential workers. A lot of people who have these lower paid jobs, getting, being delivery people or working at the supermarkets or the grocers and needing to get around. So we did have still, even though we did see a large drop, we were carrying 46,000 trips a day actually today. And even during the worst times, we were carrying about 40,000 a day. So I'm just going to turn this over to Lauren. I put together a 6-person team internally to focus on our recovery, on how we will recover, not just immediately, but over the next couple years, and some of the activities we're doing, as well as some recovery guidelines. So Lauren, I'm going to turn this on over to you.
Great, good afternoon. So as Carolyn mentioned, she, under her direction, UTA has organized a task force to develop service recovery guidelines that create a pathway forward as we reintroduce service, while also trying to take into consideration our financial constraints. And this pathway forward, these guidelines also are flexible enough that they can adapt to changing circumstances and evolving customer needs. The guidelines are intended to achieve 3 key objectives. The first is to regain the ridership that we've temporarily lost. The second is to ensure the financial stability and sustainability of UTA, of transit, in the short and long term, and to rebuild community confidence. And by that, we mean that as people return to some type of normalcy, that they find transit as a viable, reliable, and a safe option. These recovery guidelines that I'll share with you here briefly align with the 5 key principles and 4 risk phases that are in the governor's recovery plan. And I'll talk a little bit more about some of what's in that plan and how we align with that here in just a minute. As part of our recovery, we are currently conducting surveys with our customers to find out if their transit expectations, travel patterns, and behaviors have changed or will change due to COVID-19. That survey is currently being conducted and should be wrapped up by the end of the month. So sometime in the beginning of June, we should have some results that we can use to consider as we look at recovering service. We are also closely monitoring our ridership and have made and will make targeted service adjustments as needed. These service additions, of course, will need to be balanced with our financial constraints, which at this point are not yet fully known. So our adjustments will need to be measured and thoughtful. Also, I think, let's see if we can go to the next slide. I think I may, there we go. Thank you. As part of our recovery plan, we've implemented and standardized enhanced cleaning practices, as Carolyn has mentioned, and I'll talk more about the future of that here in just a minute. These activities, as well as others designed to achieve the 3 objectives that I mentioned, are part of UTA's recovery plan summary that I'll share with you now. Next slide. So this slide reflects the progressive risk phases in the governor's recovery plan. You're probably all familiar with this, so I won't go into a lot of detail, but as you know, there are 4 main phases to the governor's plan, identified by color, that reflect the community's risk levels. Again, our plan aligns with these phases. Obviously, the governor's plan is much more lengthy than what's included here, but we identified just a few key features of that plan that relate to transit and will affect our service and our recovery plan. So if we just look at one of the risk levels, let's look at the orange, the moderate risk column. We have a few areas in our service area that are still in the orange: Salt Lake City, West Valley, and Magna. The rest are in the yellow. But if you look at the orange, you can see the type of things that are in the governor's plan that certainly affect us. The governor's plan strongly encourages that in the orange and yellow phases that we wear face masks in public, particularly where social distancing measures are difficult to maintain. It encourages in the orange phase that we stay at home as much as possible. We practice social distancing. Group sizes go up to 20 versus 10 in the red high-risk phase that we were in previously. Schools, of course, are closed in this phase, and high-contact businesses need to operate under strict protocols. Then as it moves to the yellow, which much of our area is in yellow, still encourages face mask being worn. Group sizes increase and businesses begin to open more and more. Below that, you can see some hypothetical examples of how public health guidelines could be applied, where some local communities may be at different risk levels than others, which, as we talked about, is the case in our service area with some of our cities. UTA's plan is flexible and can accommodate those variations. Next slide. So this matrix shows a summary of UTA's recovery plan guidelines, and hopefully you can see this well enough to follow me. I'm sure if it's not available to you in hard copy or electronically, we can do that. But as you can see, it is also organized by the same risk levels as the state, the governor's plan. And there are three main components of our recovery plan. The first row shows short and midterm service guidelines. The second row shows safety protocol in each phase. And then the third row shows activities involving planning for the future. And for the sake of time, and some of you have seen this already, let me just highlight a few of the key elements of the plan that give a sense of what it's all about. And again, let's start focusing on the orange, since we still have some in the orange phase, some of our service areas still there. In the short and midterm service row, our plan includes adding service, reintroducing service based on route ridership. Those decisions will be made in a way that is consistent with major reopenings of service centers like universities and other key stakeholders in our region. We will also need to consider our financial limitations and the impact to low income and minority populations. We're closely monitoring the ridership, and we've set thresholds of ridership by route and mode that, when reached, trigger an automatic internal review of service levels. You can see those threshold levels listed here by mode, and as we shift to the yellow phase, those thresholds change as risk levels are reduced. In each level, we are also implementing safety protocol measures in the second row there. Carolyn has already shared with you, and Eddie have shared many of those enhanced safety measures that we've implemented. We anticipate, by the way, that most of those measures that we've implemented will continue into the yellow and even green phases, with the exception of rear door boarding. Once we have installed the operator barriers that Eddie mentioned on all the buses, we will return to normal front door boarding. As part of this process, we will continue to monitor industry best practices and customer feedback, and will adjust accordingly. However, as I mentioned, it is clear that we will carry forward many of these enhanced safety protocols even after the virus is gone. We're interested in seeing the results of this customer service or survey, but we suspect that our customers' perspective and expectations may have permanently changed, and so we are preparing to adjust to that. Finally, in the bottom row, we have different activities that involve in planning for recovery and planning for the future. Some of these include gathering ridership data, financial information, which changes regularly, identifying capital improvements that can enhance safety in the future. And as I mentioned, we're working to study and better understand our customers' post-COVID expectations. We'll be reviewing and revising our fare collection methods, developing long-term safety protocols, and refining our long-term service plan. to adjust to kind of the new post-COVID world. So some have asked what happens if some portion of our service region is at a different risk level than the rest. This plan accommodates that. As we progress through the different phases, we will be prepared to address the needs of the local communities that may remain or return to higher risk levels through our enhanced safety protocol, the added service that we'll be adding that reduces congestion on our buses and so forth. So hopefully that gives you a sense of the overall guidelines in this plan. Do you have any questions?
All right, thank you. Thank you for that. Carolyn, do you have more? Or are we ready to move to 6?
No, I think you can move to 6. I appreciate, and I want to just thank all of our workforce and all the support that everybody's given us in terms of being able to get through this and letting us to be so flexible and making the changes very quickly and continuing to have to adapt to the situations. Thanks.
I think the enhanced cleaning should just be what we do going forward.
I do think, as Lauren mentioned, that there will be safety protocols that will be carried ongoing. And I do think the industry and everything that's going on in terms of different technologies for materials are going to change. Just real quickly, one of the things we are doing is changing out fabric seats in the light rail. We have that procurement out right now to change them to hard plastic or plastic with vinyl. Those types of things we're looking at. What are those capital improvements we need to continue to provide easier cleaning, and we'll continue to see what the technologies are. There's a lot of stuff coming out that allows things to stay disinfected for up to 48 hours, and we'll continue to look at that.
Thank you. All right, item number 6 is next. It's the Safety and Security Report, the Utah State Safety Oversight Program Report. Sheldon, go ahead, sir.
Chair, thanks for the opportunity. We have the pleasure of introducing our annual report from UDOT to the board where things have gone. And let's talk a little bit about the State Safety Oversight Program. FTA has oversight of light rail agencies and S-lines, much like we have here. And the way they accomplish that is through the State Safety Oversight Program. For our state, the state of Utah, the state decided that UDOT would be the entity that provides oversight of us. And the person who's been doing that for the past several years is Jim Golden, doing an outstanding job. One thing that's changed since last year is that he is also now the chief railroad engineer. So he's wearing both of those hats. Both of those are safety partners for UTA. He's chief railroad engineer. Some of the things he accomplishes are surveillance reports. And we have several Q-cutter projects that are in work or completed throughout the valley, which help prevent traffic from queuing up on our railroad crossings. So he's a big safety partner in that realm. 673 is one of the newest rules in the State Safety Oversight Program, helps make sure that UTA is compliant with those rules, and I think he'll talk about that one. His group does triennial auditing and review of our internal auditing each year, and so he brings in best practices from other properties and helps UTA improve in that way as well. To talk about an hours of service audit that was completed last year, we probably have one of the best hours of service programs for light rail in the United States, and part of that is due to the State Safety Oversight Program helping us get that way. And finally, if I can be so bold as to have a little bit of homework for everyone, if you have not been to railsafetyalliance.org, it's a website, railsafetyalliance.org, that is rail safety for the state of Utah, Idaho, and Nevada. And Jim Golden sits on the board for that group and has helped guide us through standing up that program and providing rail safety presentations and safety fairs through our state and the other 2 states. And so with that, I'd like to turn it over to Jim Golden for his annual report. Thanks.
Thank you, Sheldon. Certainly appreciate Sheldon and all that he does to support me in my position and to make my job quite easy. If I'm completely honest, Sheldon does a great job, and his team is a great support to me. As Sheldon mentioned, my name is Jim Golden. I'm the State Safety Oversight Program Manager for UDOT. In this position, as part of a federal requirement, I have the opportunity to report to the UTA board and also provide a report to the governor each year. For your information, I think that report went out at the beginning of the month. I've tried to make that available to the board if you'd like to review that. We can go ahead and go to the next slide. For today, just briefly, I'd like to cover three simple areas: the basics of the SSO program, some of the key activities that we perform, and then some of our highlights for 2019. Next slide, please. The State Safety Oversight Program has been required since the 1990s, with a few updates, the most recent being in 2015. Oversight is concentrated in the areas of system safety and also emergency preparedness. To be clear, FTA and the SSO program only covers our light rail system, that's tracks and the S-line, front runner, bus service, and paratransit are not covered under the SSO program. Next slide, please. As of November 2017, UDOT is compliant with 49 CFR Part 674. Some of the basics of this are just listed here in bullet form. Legal independence from UTA, that's why UDOT is the state safety oversight, not somebody within UTA. UDOT does have, granted by the legislature, enforcement authority. We have a qualified and trained staff. Over this last year, I was able to complete my TSSP certification for this position. And but in addition to that, I have consultants who can provide subject matter experts for any areas that I might need for auditing purposes. I will also just add that you will see another state safety oversight person hanging around the building if we ever do hang around the buildings again. I've hired Garrett Jensen, who will be a state safety oversight officer. He works with me at UDOT in the railroad program, and he will now be helping me also with the SSO, and I look forward to working with him. UTA has been really great at including me in any of their upcoming capital projects. They can turn to me. I can use my consultants to provide technical reviews. And then with any project, we can also help with a safety review prior to opening of new projects. Next slide, please. As I mentioned, the UDOT staff, we meet regularly with safety, operations, maintenance, and emergency preparedness personnel. This open relationship has proved to be very beneficial as we kind of feed off of each other and help in these various meetings. As Sheldon mentioned, the SSO program requires triennial audits, the last of which was done in early 2018, which means we'll be preparing for our next triennial audit in early 2021. UDOT also is required to provide review and approval annually of various documents, the PTAS, the EPP, and the SSP. Lots of acronyms there, but basically any of the safety or emergency preparedness or security documents that UTA has, UDOT can provide review, and we do actually provide approval of those documents. And to UTA's credit, they maintain those in a very good way, and there are usually very few minor changes each year that we have, and those are very quickly approved. The SSO also works with the safety department to investigate any accidents, incidents, or other hazards that we may identify. We also monitor any corrective action plans that come from the identification of those hazards, whether that be through an accident or employee reporting. Next slide. Per federal requirement, as Sheldon mentioned, we conducted our hours of service audit in September of 2019. This audit ensures UTA's compliance with the applicable regulations for hours of service and or best practices regarding hours of service throughout the country. As Sheldon mentioned, UTA's hours of service performance is exceptional. There were only 3 findings that resulted of this audit last year. 2 of those findings are already closed. The 3rd finding, I believe, should be resolved with the recent FRA waiver that was granted just a week or so ago. We're reviewing that now, and that should close that 3rd item. So kudos to UTA for their performance with hours of service. Next slide. UTA submitted to us their PTAS for final review in late 2019. That final review was completed. The board approved that plan with their signatures, forwarded us to that were forwarded to us in January of 2020. We provided final certification of that plan. This is well ahead of any other states in the country, and definitely ahead of the FTA deadline of July of this year. So kudos again for getting that approved. Next slide. I mentioned that the PTAS was mostly approved in early 2000. It was complete in early 2019, but it was pending the designation of a chief safety officer. UTA's board designated Sheldon Shaw as the director of safety and security, and with that designation, qualified. That met the CSO requirements. This basically summarizes Sheldon's responsibilities as him being responsible for safety and really having no other functions. He's responsible for implementation of the SMS. He reports directly to the CEO and all of the agency executives. The board and the CEO are familiar with this SMS requirement and this rule. And Sheldon, as I mentioned before, has been a great team player, and I really appreciate his cooperation helping me. Next slide. Along with UTA, and actually together with UTA, the SSO reviewed and tracked 55 events which occurred in 2019. Of those 55 events, 29 of those events were reportable to the FTA. UDOT must track and adopt UTA investigations of these events. We review those usually side by side. It's great to work with Sheldon's team, Travis King, formerly Darren Franken, but now Tina Bartholomew, I'm starting to work with, Kent Muhlstein, and others, that we basically review these side by side very collaboratively and are able to come to quick resolutions on any questions. The events are classified as accidents, incidents, or occurrences, and the language used in Part 674 defines these. These numbers seem to be down, but part of that could be due to the change of the definition over time. Currently, there are some efforts underway between UDOT and UTA to try to reduce the number of grade crossing collisions caused by motorists making illegal left turns in front of trains. That seems to be our most common accident. Next slide. Last year, in July and August, FTA came out. They also performed an audit, and they performed their triennial audit of the UDOT SSO program last year. This was the first triennial audit under the new Part 674 rule. We are still awaiting the draft report from this audit. It's been a while, but even at that, we expect few, if any, findings. Toward the end of that audit, FTA was very positive with us and praised the working relationship that UTA and UDOT have, and that gave me a really good feeling, just that they recognize the difference in our relationship compared to maybe others across the country. And with that, I think that's my last slide. I'd be happy to conclude with answering any questions.
Anyone have any questions? All right, seeing no questions, thank you for your efforts and the good work towards our safety and future. Item number 7 is next. This is the budget and finance consultation, the 2020 budget amendment number 2. We'll turn the time to Mr. Bob Biles. Bob, go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. We'll head to the next slide. We'll talk about budget amendment number 2. And in the presentation, I'll talk a little bit about some of the impacts to our 2020 operations. So if you go to the next slide, there are a few things that are affecting the operating budget. $250,000 grant from UDOT, which is used for coordinated mobility for seniors, persons with disability, and other disadvantaged groups. We had an interlocal agreement that required UTA to put in $22,000 toward park and ride maintenance costs. And then we had a $1.6 million operating contingency. We're moving $638,000 of that to capital contingency. And the chart here just shows the impact of those various changes and what the budget will look like after amendment number 2. So let's go to the next slide, because I think I want to talk a little bit about the CARES Act. The CARES Act provided $25 billion to various transit agencies. UTA's share was $187 million. It's intended to replace revenue loss, but the way it's drawn down is based upon operating and capital expense. So part of what we've done is looked at qualifying operating expense, and we're prepared as soon as that grant is approved to start drawing down from January 20th on for our operating expense. We're doing some modeling right now. I'm expecting that 60% of that money will be applied to this year, 30% to next year, and 10% in 2022. And so as Lauren and others talked about our financial capability, it really comes down to 2023 and what we think our revenues will be at that time, and making sure we match up our operating and capital expenditures with the revenues that'll be coming in. And you've heard this mentioned already that we're thinking we'll use maybe 10 million of this for some capital projects. We had some rail reliability issues last winter. That's about $5 million. The light rail seats, making those to easier maintain, that's 4.2 million. And then the bus operator shielding that Eddie talked about, it's a little bit over $700,000. If you go to the next slide. On the expense side, as you know, we made a change in April to our service level. So some of the anticipated savings, fuel, through April 30th, we've averaged 161. Our budget's 250. That's $1.9 million savings just in the first 4 months of this year. Travel, obviously people aren't traveling. So, my national conference was canceled, so I didn't get to go to that. But that is somewhere around $300,000 year to date. And then personnel costs, we haven't done any layoffs, don't anticipate to do any layoffs, but we're not filling positions so that we can match up with our scheduling. So that's right now through April, $1.6 million. We do have some additional costs. You've heard us talk about some of the work we've had to do for COVID protection for our employees and our customers. We believe we'll get 75% reimbursement on those. They're in the $200,000 range total. So it hasn't been significant like some other agencies have incurred. Stop there, see if you got any questions about the CARES Act funding and what's happening to our current operations.
Anyone have any questions?
If not, if we go to the next slide, the major change in this particular budget amendment is with the capital side. You can see there's some pretty big numbers being changed there. So these are aligned by type of adjustment, and there's a spreadsheet that was included in the materials received that gives all the detail on these. We had 100 projects that carried forward from last year. We always budget projects, don't always get them done. And so we had 100 projects, that was about $49 million coming forward. The project reductions, these are projects that we had budgeted this year that are going to be moved to 2021. They're mainly bond-funded projects and are comprised of like the Depot District, the Ogden, Weber State BRT, Meadowbrook expansion, and airport tracks. It's just the expense isn't going to happen in 2020, it will happen in 2021. And I believe there were 6 of those projects. This is the $4.2 million that's fixing some of the reliability issues that we had this last winter. As far as the new projects, $2.2 million of that's just a pass-through grant, 5310 funding. This includes the $4.2 million for the light rail seat replacement. There's a front runner business plan that majority funding came from the state. And then this also includes that $650,000 for the capital planning and environmental design work that Carlton talked about earlier. And then there were some minor reallocations. Most of those, there was $1.4 million of just between different projects. This is the $638,000 coming in from the operating budget into the capital budget. So this particular amendment takes the total budget from $196 million to almost $224 million. If you go to the next slide, so that was by type. This is just what it looks like in budget and the various line items that we had in the budget in Schedule A. So this is just a summary of Schedule A and showing how those impact. Here you can see the Depot District, almost $16 million, Ogden Weber BRT, almost $13 million. Again, those are just moving forward into 2021. And we've already adjusted our long-term financial forecast to reflect those changes. If you go to the next slide, you always wonder about revenue and what's going to happen there. So the carry forward projects involved $18 million of UTA cash. Our ending cash balance was up by about that much. And so that is what you would expect. So that worked out really well. And then here's the bond proceeds, the $28.7 million. It's just getting moved into 2021. And then reflects these grants. We've been very successful at getting some grants. So that's a real quick summary of the capital information. Did you have any questions about specific projects or anything in that budget amendment itself?
Any other questions? All right, seeing none, thank you, Bob.
Okay, I know we present a lot of detail, and if you have questions, a lot of it's in the detail. So the last slide is just knowing this will go to the board on June 3rd for formal adoption.
All right, thank you. Is there any discussion on any of those items? The delay in those projects is just simply because of the slowdown or shutdown from the COVID. That was the whole reason.
I don't believe so. I think it's just the timing of the projects.
Okay, so
when the work will be done.
Okay. All right. Item number 8's next. It's the Capital Development Projects consultation. We'll have Mary DiLoretto present that. Go ahead, Mary.
Good afternoon. I'm happy to be here this afternoon to give you an update on our capital project program. And can we advance the slide there? Okay, so first I'm going to talk about where we are in updating the 5-year capital plan. Then I'm going to give a brief update on some of our major capital projects that we're currently working on. And then an update on the grant and partner funding that we have received or anticipate receiving for our capital projects over the next few years. Okay, next slide. So just as a reminder, capital projects include all new construction projects, state of good repair, facilities maintenance such as roofing, parking lot repairs, bus lift replacements, things like that. All of our vehicle purchases such as buses, vans, or maintenance vehicles. If we ever buy new trains, they would be included here. And then information technology projects, safety and security projects such as police items, emergency response items, fencing, things like that. And then any major pieces of equipment that are over $25,000. So next slide. Last year, we prepared our first 5-year capital plan and presented it to the Advisory Council in September. And it did not include what was in 2019. So that's why a lot of the 2019 projects were just what people anticipated being spent. But now with this 5-year plan, we hope to help mitigate some of those challenges of applying an annual budget to a multi-year project. So the 5-year capital plan also aids in the long-range budget planning. Bob puts the transit financial plan together that goes out over 30 years, and this helps us identify what funds we'll have in those years and how we could spread out those funds. So the first 5-year plan that we did covered the period from 2020 to 2024. So we're in that right now. And we're updating the current plan both based on the carryover request that Bob just talked about, and then also updated schedule projections for our major projects. And the next step now, what we're working on is to create our 5-year plan for the 2021 to 2025 time period. So next slide. The 5-year capital plan for 2021 to 2025, it has to be consistent with the TFP and the 2021 budget targets that are being developed right now. The future year budgets may need to be modified based on new revenue projections, including the effect of COVID-19 that will have on our revenues, what Bob mentioned earlier in his presentation. So we have to look again. That'll affect how we adjust our budget targets for the next several years. And then any new project requests that aren't already in the current 5-year plan, we'll look at them and we'll prioritize them based on safety, state of good repair, leveraging our partner funds such as grants and other local partners, and then system improvements that are needed. And then we plan, once we get that together, we plan to bring that draft 5-year plan to the Advisory Council this September for consultation, and then we'd bring it back to the UTA board for their review and approval. And once it's approved, the first year of that 5-year plan will be incorporated into the annual budget for 2021. Okay, next slide. So here's just an update on some of the projects that are currently underway. The Depot District out behind the FLHQ building here work is progressing. If you guys were here, you'd see that there's no buildings behind us anymore. They've all been demolished other than the new building we're working on, the wash building, and the west parking lot is also currently under construction. These will be done, well, the whole thing, the next phase is going to be the maintenance building and the admin building and the bus canopies. And we expect the entire project to be completed early January of 2023. So that's well underway. The Ogden BRT project, where we are at that one, we have the 60% design complete. We've selected our contractor, and we're pursuing a small starts grant for about $65 million on that. So since we are pursuing federal funds, our next step is a federal risk and readiness review that we anticipate happening sometime this summer. And then we hope to get the grant January of 2021 and then open the line in December of 2022. The next project is the airport station relocation. And that's all part of the airport new terminals. We will have to move our track station at the airport. So we have started the construction of that new station in March, but what we'll have to do is build a temporary platform, and we're going to build that this summer, and that will shuttle passengers from that temporary platform. It'll be near where the current employee parking is, and it'll shuttle passengers to the new terminal when it opens this September, and then we'll be able to start constructing our new station in front of the terminal, and that's anticipated to be completed a year from this September, so September of 2021. Our Tiger first mile, last mile projects, they're going well. As part of that grant that we got from FTA, we are planning to complete 161 projects. These include ADA ramps, bike lanes, sidewalks, crosswalk improvements, ped bridges, multi-use paths. To date, we've completed 81 of those projects, and the bigger bridges, we're starting the Lehigh Bridge probably later this year. And that has been very well received from the community, a lot of local partner support on that project. The next project is the Vineyard Station and the associated Northern Utah County double track. We've selected a contractor for that work. We'll have one contractor to do both pieces of that work. We anticipate construction starting in August or early September, and then we plan to have that station open by April change day in 2021. Another big project we have ongoing is the Sharp-Tintic rail consolidation. And this project will connect, we own part of one line, the Sharp line, and part of the Tintic line, which would take us down to Payson, Utah, but we have no connection from our existing front runner line over to the other line. So this connection will allow us in the future to continue front runner all the way down from Provo down to Payson. We are currently doing the design this year. We would like to start construction next year, but we need some additional federal funding, so we're looking at some grant opportunities to get that additional needed funding. And the last one of our major projects is a combination of all our bus stop improvements, operator restrooms, and wayfinding signage. We have a number of those under design or construction right now. We hope to complete over 100 bus stop improvements this year. And we have 3 restrooms under design. We hope to complete at least those 3 and hopefully more, and a lot of signage being completed at our major stations. Next. So we also, as part of our capital project, we have a lot of state of good repair projects going on. These include vehicle replacements for new vehicles, vehicle rehab, such as our light rail overhaul that we're doing on our light rail cars, our commuter rail engines, we're replacing them all out, bus engines and transmissions. It also includes rail infrastructure projects, such as grade crossings, rail replacements, ballast and tie, rehab and replacement. And then our rail systems, which include the traction power substations, our OCS or overhead catenary systems, rehab and replacement, and our train controls and switches. And then also our facilities projects, such as I mentioned earlier, our park and ride rehab, stations and platforms, roofing, bus lifts, etc. Some of the future, if we get the next slide, some of our potential future projects that we're looking at right now is the Mid-Valley Bus Rapid Transit Line. Right now, the Advisory Council approved that locally preferred alternative for that project, and right now we're still trying to find all the additional funds. We have a little bit of funding gap on that project. We hope to come back in September with a funding plan if we could find those needed funds. On Front Runner, we have double track that we're looking at. We applied for federal funding for some double track segments on the line. And then also, we're looking at a South Utah County transit study that will look at the transit needs from Provo down to Santa Quin. And that will be going out for procurement on a consultant for that work in the next month or so. The Davis County Community Connector Project is a bus rapid transit project that would connect Davis County into Salt Lake, and that environmental study is currently in process. The Point in the Mountain Transit Study is underway. It's a transit analysis right now, and we hope to move into the environmental phase later this year. There's also a Green Line 400 West realignment that we're looking at. That's just in the concept phases right now. The Sandy South Jordan Circulator Project, a transit study was completed for that a few years ago, and that may be part of some of the solutions with the Point in the Mountain Transit Study as well. So we'll look at that further. And then also the Central Corridor Transit Study, where we're looking at transit in northern Utah County, and that transit analysis is currently underway. Next slide. So this is just some of the funding that we've had from grants and other partner funds. Currently, within our 5-year plan, we've identified $116 million worth of federal grant funds for our capital projects. We have a bus and bus facilities grants that we've applied for. We have some formula grants, which we just get every year, and then some discretionary grants that we've applied for and been awarded. And we are going to use those funds for the Depot District, some ADA bus stop improvements, the operator restrooms, and the wayfinding signage. We've also received a lot of funds from CMAQ, STP, and TAP programs, and we use those funds for our bus replacements, commuter rail, engine rehab, because that air quality considerations there, bus corridor improvements, and then intermodal centers. For small starts, we are applying for that small starts grant for the Ogden BRT project. And for Tiger First Mile, Last Mile, we received a $20 million grant from the federal government on that project. So that totals to $116 million of what we know about so far. The next slide. Okay, so we've also received state appropriations for our capital projects. For the Depot District, we get $2.5 million a year for that project until that's complete. The Point of the Mountain, we were awarded $1 million. We're hoping that doesn't go away with some of the implications of COVID, but right now we're anticipating that $1 million that we got in the last legislative session. And we also were awarded $1.6 million in the last legislative session for the Front Runner Strategic Business Plan that we'd like to begin shortly. Other grants that we've received were from the Volkswagen settlement. We received $13 million for 20 electric buses. And then we've also received two $500,000 grants from Rocky Mountain Power for charging infrastructure. Some different grants, next slide, that we are applying for. Right now there's a lot of federal grant opportunities out right now, and we've been submitting, our grants team has been working furiously to get them all in. We anticipate them all being awarded before Election Day in November. So hopefully we'll know some of them as early as this week and through the summer and through September, October timeframe. But we have a $4 million request in the Bus and Bus Facilities program for onboard mobile data devices. We have $4 million more through the CMAQ program that we're requesting for different transit signal priorities, charging infrastructures, and bus stops. Through the Transit Security Grant Program, we have $4.4 million in requests for various safety and security items. We have two grant submittals for the Build Grant that were submitted last week. $3 million is for the Point of the Mountain Environmental Impact Statement that we would, if we go to an EIS, we'll need more than the $1 million that we currently have programmed. So this would help that project. And then also Build Construction Grant, $20 million for the Front Runner double track that we'd like to complete from South Jordan to Draper. Also, we have several TOD grant requests out there for $330,000. We anticipate that in the next month or so, finding out if we receive that. The LONO grant, we have $5 million request for the Ogden electric buses for the BRT project. And that we hear is supposed to come out this week. We should hopefully find out if we got that. And then there's a safety research demonstration project, $220,000 for suicide prevention measures. The next slide, please. So one thing I neglected to put on my slide, we also have a lot of local partner funds. We have, in the 5-year capital plan right now, we have almost $25 million from our local partners committed in the 5-year plan. We have, for the Ogden BRT, we have over $9 million, $9.1 million. In the Tiger projects, we have over $6.6 million in partner funds. And so that's a significant amount of our funding, and we appreciate all those partners working with us. Other potential funding opportunities that we see out there now are hopefully from the state, if this, as part of our Front Runner business plan, shows different opportunities that we could get some Front Runner funds to support Front Runner double track. And then we have rated very high on the TTIF program through the state, and hopefully that funding will still be available. And we have been recommended for $4 million for the Ogden BRT project, $22.8 million for the Mid-Valley BRT project, $500,000 for the Provo pedestrian bridge, which is part of our Tiger project. And so hopefully we also have future year requests that we will be submitting for that program as time goes on. And then other grant opportunities, we've submitted some grant requests to Rocky Mountain Power for additional charging infrastructure throughout our system. And then Davis County has some third quarter funds that we've applied for to see if we can move that project from the Salt Lake Davis Community Connector project from the design, from the environmental phase to the design phase, and also some microtransit pilot projects in that area. And I think that's all I have. Sorry, that was fast. Is there any questions?
Any questions for Mary? All right. Seeing no questions or comments, we'll move on to item number 9 now.
Could I make a comment? I'm very pleased with the aggressiveness that UTA is taking in their capital development. I think that's wonderful. And
Thank you.
good work.
Comments? Okay, let's go on to item number 9, which is transit-oriented development consultation with Mr. Paul Drake. Go ahead, sir.
All right, thank you. Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Okay, so in the last legislative session, the Utah State Legislature passed Senate Bill 150, and that amends UTA's authority to participate in transit-oriented developments. What it does is it opens up opportunities for UTA to collaborate with cities and counties to better integrate transit into those communities. But it will also impact how UTA approaches our projects and how we prioritize those projects. Next slide, please. The opportunities allowed by Senate Bill 150 will likely require a slight revision to our policy. So we would, of course, like the council's input. There's no action required of the council after this discussion, but we would like your feedback on a few questions. Those questions, so during the presentation, would you please think of these? What would the council like to see included in station area plans? How would the council define a TOD-ready site? And what would the council like to consider in prioritizing projects? Next slide, please. A brief history. In 2010, the state legislature authorized UTA to partner with private developers on initially 5 sites, and that was later raised to 8. The cap was intended to test the usefulness of the TOD program and work out the kinks. UTA implemented some successful projects, some of which are still being developed. And in 2016, UTA began a comprehensive refinement of that TOD program, which enhanced the role of regional and community partners. In 2019, per the new policy, the board selected the final 3 TOD sites. And in 2020, we saw a lot of support from community leaders, both from cities that were selected and those who were not, and that encouraged the legislature to remove the cap. Next slide, please. So what does SB 150 do? Much of the same is the same, with a couple of big changes. TOD sites are still selected by the UTA board. Partners are required to contribute equity. Affordable housing provisions should be included in the TOD policy, which they are. UTA is to work with local and regional partners, which we do, and UTA is to perform a cost-benefit analysis of each project. So what's new? As mentioned, the bill eliminates the cap of the TODs. That's the big news. To be eligible, the municipalities that want to participate with UTA need to do 2 things. One is to perform a station area plan. The other is to be compliant with the modern income housing requirements. That includes including affordable housing provisions in their general plans, and there's some reporting requirements. Next slide, please. These changes will have some impact on the local advisory council, as station area plans are now a statutory requirement. We hope and expect that these communities will pursue thoughtful planning around all of our transit hubs. The statute establishes that the local advisory council is to review, approve, and recommend final adoption of those plans by the board of trustees. Next slide, please. The statute defines a station area plan as a vision roughly a half mile around each station. They are to involve all relevant stakeholders. The plan should identify constraints and provide a plan to address those constraints to that vision. And then upon completion, the plan is to be adopted by the city or county. Those are just the basic requirements. If there are other requirements that the board prefers, those can be determined by the UTA Board of Trustees. Next slide, please. So we've seen a lot of interest from cities and developers wondering what's next. You know, what projects are we going to pursue? How will UTA prioritize their new projects? What criteria will determine if project is ready? And how will UTA allocate its resources? Next slide, please. For the council's reference, there are 3 UTA staff dedicated to TOD. That's the Director of Real Estate, TOD Project Manager, TOD Planning Specialist, with support from the AG's office, an on-call consultant, and of course from other UTA departments as needed. Next slide, please. The team is working on 3 active station area plans, pursuing funding on at least 7 more. Mary mentioned that in the 5-year capital plan. And then we're working with cities to implement the recommendations of all of the station area plans that are currently adopted. In the next 12 months, the team also anticipates 4 to 5 groundbreakings, 2 to 4 RFPs on additional sites. And meanwhile, they're managing 8 completed development phases and 3 phases that are currently under construction. Next slide, please. So even without the cap, we still face a couple of realities. Number one, our staff and our resources are limited. And then 2, not all projects are shovel ready. So although we would love to pursue all sites, there are these, of course, realities that we have to face. Completing a station area plan doesn't necessarily mean that a site is ready to be developed. Market has to be ready. We must work with the cities to build the necessary support from the surrounding community, establish TOD supportive zoning, identify funding mechanisms for infrastructure. The city must meet those legislative requirements that were mentioned before. And those site-specific hurdles to development that are identified in the station area plan need to be addressed. Those can include zoning, infrastructure projects, or funding, land assembly, environmental constraints, or other hurdles that preclude immediate UTA involvement. Next slide, please. Projects still can progress. TOD is a team support. Cities and stakeholders, they play a key role in preparing for TOD. To help, there are a number of funding tools listed here. WFRC's TLC planning grants. They can be used to fund plans and related efforts. MAG has similar funding available. There are federal TOD planning grant funds available. Transportation reinvestment zones are a good value capture tool that the state has given us. And of course, the communities can support TOD in their regular course of business by prioritizing infrastructural and maintenance improvements. Next slide, please. So how do we choose projects? The board ultimately determines the TOD priorities through 2 ways: the selection of the sites and their budget oversight. The sites will also be vetted per the new legislative requirements mentioned earlier. Our system analysis tool that we use to select the final 3 sites will continue to help the board determine site readiness. And as we discussed, we'll track the resolution of the site-specific obstacles. Next slide, please. So are there any questions from the council before we get into those questions about the TOD program or SB 150?
One, Paul, when you said cost benefit analysis will be performed, what's the aim? Is that changed any from what it's been in the past? What is the cost benefit analysis? What's it going to mean for UTA?
You bet. The cost benefit analysis is written in the statute. There are a few things that we do have to address. Some of those things are like ridership, of course, monetary benefit, improvement to the existing transit system, its effect on regional planning efforts, things like that. So it is defined in statute how that cost benefit analysis should go. And we put that together as we finalize projects, figure out how many units or how many square feet of each building type is in there, and then we can do that analysis and present it to the board before moving forward.
Economic benefit component as part of that to UTA, like sort of the like it was in the past, or is it more shifted to benefits to the system and ridership?
Well, there's still an economic benefit portion to that, not just to UTA, but also to the community.
Any questions or comments at this point? All right, go ahead.
Okay. So questions for the council. What would the council like to see in station area plans going forward? Are there any thoughts on that?
Maybe have them ranked in the cost benefit analysis and the number of local partners, so we can see which TODs may have the biggest impact.
That's great. That's definitely part of what we want to do, is prioritize the ones that have the biggest bang for the buck. Thank you.
I think that we need to have a calendar out in front so that the local government can make plans in their zoning if needed, changes to be made. We need to be able to also forewarn, I guess, businesses in the area of the TOD that there are changes coming, so they can forecast whatever they have to do to take advantage of it or move.
Yeah, that's great. The station area plans currently have a community outreach component. It's right up front, and we do like to engage, especially the neighboring landowners and businesses. But that will definitely be part of our program going forward. Thank you.
Upsides that you saw, probably the only one from this COVID-19 business, was how clean the air was for quite a while. It was remarkable, actually. One of my priorities would be going forward with our TODs is that we factor in somehow, the ridership being important, but also the opportunity for it to be to be a service or an asset that allows people to drive much less, not just to get back and forth to work, but maybe to move around near the TODs, or maybe we integrate the TODs down the line so that the folks have an opportunity to drive much less and use the system for recreation and things other than just going to work. Maybe we make sure we incorporate educational institutions in some of these places, so that if we're going to have people going to live classes again, that they can use transit to get there back and forth. I'd like to see like an education component into these areas where we're going to build up, so there's a way for people to get educated, work, live, play, do all those things. And then I think the benefit will be, certainly our air will improve if we can get people to drive less.
Completely agree. Thank you, Mr. Chair. We're actually working this.
Mayor Mendenhall has a comment. Go ahead, Aaron.
Go ahead. I'm sorry to interrupt.
Oh, thank you. Mayor Walker, thanks for bringing up the air quality component. I was going to mention on the WFRC side of things, I know that they do a lot of work around and have a lot of talent around growth and GIS mapping and the pressures of growth, the density projections or potential, obviously based on local municipal land use decision making. But I'd like to know, like, in terms of the 2040 plan and the growth projections, where the projects stack up, as we talked about, one of the bang for the buck measures, but using some of those WFRC tools that help us look at the layers of need and pressure from the growth that we anticipate. And I know that air quality is one of those that they measure for, so that would be helpful to include as well.
Wonderful. So tie the priorities to the projected growth demand with the regional partners. Perfect. Thank you.
Yeah, I think to Mayor Hill's point, WFRC probably has a good pre-existing amount of information on the level of land use change that would be required, or what is already supported beyond the TOD itself. If there's, it would be helpful for me to know if the surrounding area has already been upzoned to support a more dense environment, or if it hasn't yet, I would want to know that too.
Great. Great. Thank you.
Mr. Chair, Clint Smith got a comment that I think that really kind of Mayor Mendenhall and Mayor Hale both kind of really dovetailed into what my thoughts were. But, you know, the second bullet point that's here is, and I may be going back a little bit more than necessary, but, you know, when you talk about how would we define a TOD ready site, I think a lot of that really falls in line with, you know, our individual jurisdictions and their local land use plans and authority there. You know, it's one thing to have a concept, or for a community to have a concept of creating a TOD site within their community and some of the benefits that potentially come from that. But when it comes to actually having the land use designations in their own general plans and in their own zoning authorities there to create that TOD, because it's not something that's common in a lot of our communities, that's a lot of times, you know, much harder said or much harder to do than really just talking about the concept. So for me, when you talk about defining a TOD ready site, again, I think that's working very closely with the local municipality to make sure that all of those aspects of land use are in place to actually make that happen, and a full understanding of what that means beyond just what the TOD zone itself encompasses to what Mayor Mendenhall said, and that's the surrounding area around it and how it ties into that.
Absolutely. Definitely, we need to have the right codes in place in order to move forward. So thank you for that comment. I appreciate that. Any other thoughts?
All right, go ahead, Paul.
Okay, well, we're kind of bouncing around on all these questions, so I don't have a preference on if there are thoughts on any of them. But are there any other thoughts on what constitutes a TOD ready site, or how we would prioritize projects moving forward?
At this point, we should define, right what we think, like Mayor Mendenhall said. You know, is the area been upzoned around it? We ought to create that criteria so that if there are communities that want one, we've got it, laid out. This is what you're going to have for us to look at it, and it won't be ready until it's there.
Yep.
Mr. Chair, I would love to have staff come back to us with a draft concept of a scoring card, basically some kind of a way for us to categorically think through all the things that we've brought up, be able to measure as quantifiable as they may be, and that way it creates the transparency for the applicants or the areas that we're looking at to know that we're taking the same approach on all of the projects that we consider.
If I may, Mayor, I'm glad that you're thinking that way. Perhaps we could go into a conversation at some future date about our system analysis tool, which does just what you're describing. We partnered with our regional partners, UDOT, University of Utah. We had outside consultants taking a look, and we're gathering all sorts of data about all of our station areas, including zoning, the market readiness, affordable housing need, those kind of things. And it is, they call it a rubric that helps our board to make these objective decisions about which sites are the most ready for that. So I would be happy to discuss that with the local advisory council sometime, or with any of you individually. but excellent idea, and we're on top of it, Mayor.
We could bring that back to the next advisory council and go over that and discuss how that would fit into this process that Paul is talking about.
Happy
And
to
then
do
how
that.
we continue and go forward with that tool.
I think we should do that and allocate enough time in the meeting for, good, meaningful presentation so everyone can understand it. Because I think this is probably the next most important thing we'll do going forward.
Okay. Thank you all for your input. Is there anything else? I don't want to be blamed for Chair missing his launch. I've been watching that.
It got scrubbed, so you can't get blamed.
Oh, good. All right. Okay.
Keep going.
I do have one other slide. If we're ready to move on to the next, Mr. Chair. Okay. So this is a slightly different conversation. Didn't want it to take precedence over the input that on our program and whatnot. But at the request of the chair, I've compiled some thoughts about the current pandemic and its effect on TOD. There's a caveat, is that nobody really knows what's going to happen in the long term, if any. However, the industry has to plan for the future, and that involves evaluating risk. And when you evaluate risk, you kind of have to take off the rose-colored glasses and look at the worst-case scenario. So take what is here with a little grain of salt. But these are some of the observations that we've seen and that we've heard from our colleagues in the development world. So first, in the lending community, the main takeaway is that the risk is unknown. So even though the federal rates are low, because banks don't quite know how to quantify the risk yet, the effective rates are up. Also, for that same reason, equity requirements are a little bit higher on our developments, and that makes it hard. Well, the last thing is that there's a priority that's given to their preferred customers. So these are the tried and true customers that continue to go into those lenders. And that makes it hard for unproven developers or any non-conventional projects to get the necessary financing that they need. That doesn't mean that it's impossible, but it's just a little bit more difficult. In the residential market, it's observed that the higher end units are being less impacted than the lower end projects. And the projects that are built, the B and C residential projects, are seeing more of the rent abatements and difficulty collecting rent. So that's just an observation. Housing prices have actually seen some increases. You may have heard that. As demand is still strong, there's still need for housing, and there's a shortage. And in fact, there's an even more shortage because a lot of listings have been pulled from the market. So there's a temporary increase there. We'll likely see a greater need because of the economic impacts for affordable housing, and there will definitely be a premium on open space. In the office market, there's probably I've heard the most speculation here. Work from home is the adoption of work from home has been accelerated. That means that companies can more easily spread out. You've probably heard about Facebook and some other community or companies that have decided that work from home is going to be more prevalent. That also allows folks to live outside of the main hub of those companies, and those companies can more easily geographically diversify. That makes it so that they are less susceptible to things like pandemics. So there's some speculation that they will do so. That might impact office demand here in Utah. It also means that at least in the short term, there will be less demand for office space. Perhaps in the long term, that could be the case, depending on how tenants look at their needs as they reevaluate their leases. Retail, you can probably guess, has been hit fairly hard again. In the short term, safety is going to be key. And in the long term, online presence is going to be essential. We do have one hotel in our TOD down in South Jordan. Hotel and travel in general has been hit probably the hardest. They're reporting about a 28% occupancy, which is about half of what it was in the 2008 recession. And they're projecting up to 4 years before we can return to 2019 revenues. But as you know, COVID is an evolving situation, and we and our partners are monitoring it. We're addressing the issues as they come up specific to the projects, our active projects, and we're keeping an eye on what the trends are doing in case we do need to react in that way. Any questions on this?
Anyone have any questions or comments? All right, are you done, Paul, with your presentation?
Yes, thank you for your time.
All right, thank you. I think that as we look forward, it's going to be interesting to see. I've had some big employers in our community that have talked about, less of a need for office space than they thought they had pre-COVID. So it could be very interesting going forward. Item number 10 is next, and that's our other business. And that was the plan or talk about our next meeting. I was kind of hoping we could maybe do if we want a meeting before September, if September's going to be it. But I'd like a meeting that has enough time that we can really get involved and in detail on the scoring sheet for TOD and let everyone have an opportunity to really talk, maybe a meeting focused on at least half the time that we could spend on that, because I do think, and I think a lot of members of the committee will think it's the most important thing we're going to do going forward, and it would be really nice to be able to sit down and wrestle with it and have a good open discussion. Anybody?
For staff's view, I mean, we have no problem doing that. I would probably, of course, based on the timing to get the meeting arranged and then the presentation and everything up and running for you, we're probably 6-8 weeks out, but that could be August timeframe. But I'm not sure how people's availability is. Or beginning of August might work. Or some other time in August, we could do a month ahead and do it more like a workshop or something, or a meeting where there's no actions, but just discussion.
I think so, because like I say, I think the fact that they took the cap off is actually outstanding for what we're trying to do going forward. So I think I'd like to do a workshop. Maybe we could have everybody chime in somehow if they're agreeable to doing a workshop in August, just on TOD and what it means and how it's going to work going forward.
This is Julie Fulmer. I think that's a great idea. I'm all for it.
Yeah, Mr. Chair, Clint Smith, I would support that as well.
A couple more of you.
Mayor Hale, thumbs up on that.
Workshops are great.
All right, looks like we have enough that are interested to make it official. Any other items to discuss about the next meeting, the next official meeting, not the workshop, but the September 16th, 2020 meeting?
So we would keep I'm assuming we'll keep the September workshop to do our business and then try to do our meeting. And then we would do another workshop maybe earlier, correct?
Yes.
Just on the TOD.
Yes.
Perfect.
Yes.
Okay, so we'll do some polling of the members then. Thanks.
Anyone have anything else to add or discuss today? Maybe we'll be able to meet in person by then, if we're lucky. Well, if there's no further discussion, that takes us to item number 11, which is our favorite item, which is the motion to adjourn the meeting.
So moved, Mr. Chair.
All right, we have a motion by Mayor Mendenhall and second by Mayor Fulmer. Are all in favor of adjournment? Say aye.
Aye.
Any of you opposed? All right, I'll rule that the ayes have it. No opposition. thank you for all your good work setting this up, Jana and everybody getting the technical things figured out. I know it was a lot of work to do. You guys did a great job. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you all. Appreciate it.